there's a lot less focus on people like Hassan of the Cursed Arm, which is really unfortunate because by nature he's a pretty unique individual. What I really want to address here is how exactly did he end in the position that we meet him in the story, and kind of explore more into that. The drive to be a part of the Order of Assassins was strict, and this was no different for Cursed Arm. Throughout his life, he tried mastering his own technique that would get him the respect he deserves. Sadly, it was a goal that he would never reach. What stood between him and his sure way to victory was the raw talent required to do these phantasms, the Zabanyas. So realizing this, he was left at a loss, and he was even more confused as to how he should move forward. That is until his confrontation with the demonic spirit Shaitan, aka the devil himself. It's posed to us that Shaitan is a Middle Eastern evil spirit who refused to bow to Allah, and he was cast down to a life of hellfire, the counterpart to Satan, one where Shaitan would go on to lead the rest of his non-believers against Allah. Something that's interesting and conflicting about Hassan of the Cursed Arm is that he was a believer. That was his creed. It was the only thing he believed in. So much so that he considered merging his own body with this evil in order to reach his destination. So you have to ask, was the price that Cursed Arm had to pay one that was necessary? Surely he could have just continued being holy and chose to forego becoming part of the Hassans, the Order of Assassins. Yet in his mind, in this image, it was something that didn't quite sit right with him. To be a believer is one thing, but to be a part of the order, to him at least, was everything. It was that one seal of approval that truly showed how devout he was, and that was something that couldn't be reached with sheer worship alone. So when he met up with Shaitan, Shaitan being the evil spirit that he is, he couldn't wait to consume Hassan's soul and lead him down this hollow path of unrighteousness. Except Hassan had a trick for him. In the middle of their confrontation, Hassan was able to manipulate the situation and trap Shaitan in one of his arms in exchange for him not having casual access to the arm any longer. So now you have this weird balance of him finally getting what he wanted. Once he did this, he was able to perform his own version of Zabanya, delusional heartbeat. That's where it comes from. But on the other side, as a holy man, he had now become a walking contradiction because he chose to merge with evil in order to do so. Much like any initial pairing that you see in the franchise, it speaks a lot to the relationship between him and Zokin, for that matter. How Zokin was initially this person that wanted good for the world, but his obsession slowly started to consume his overall destination. And that's a lot like what happened to Hassan, which made him the perfect spirit to serve Zokin during the Heaven's Field War. And I feel like Nasu made it a point to say that even when he achieved this state of being able to do his own Zabanya, it didn't come without a cost. Due to the improper summoning that Zokin performed in order to bring Hassan out in the war, the dude didn't actually have intelligence when he first came out. He was more like an actual beast. He actually had to gain his intelligence the further he went throughout the war. This is something that was exclusive to his introduction in Heaven's Field, by the way. When you see him take down people like Kazuki, for example, there was nothing to be said in those scenes because he had yet to take on that influence. And you'll notice this a lot when he's first summoned because he makes a lot of weird sounds and movements that you wouldn't normally make as a person. He sounded more like an insect, and his moves were a lot more barbaric. When he was being chased down by Ku, that level of human intelligence wasn't present there either. So it's not a matter of Hassan not being skilled. His issue was just creating the phantasm, because even without regular human intelligence, he was still putting a lot of work in on Ku from an elusive perspective. I mean, this man was eluding everything that Ku was throwing at him. Bro was out here looking like Floyd Mayweather. Look at the scorecard. Even when the shadow was nowhere to be found, if he was just some pushover, he would have never made it back to Riodo Lake. And that's a fact, because again, it's Ku Cullen. Let's be real. And Nasu tells us that it wasn't until he consumed the heart of Ku Cullen where he finally started to gain human intelligence, and that influence started to seep into his spirit, to which at that point we later on meet him in the story, and you can see that he has more to say, more banter to offer, and more emotional intelligence as well. It's really something to think about when you consider that him gaining this intelligence may or may have not been holding him back in the war. I mean, by the very nature of you gaining human intelligence, your emotional intelligence has to increase also, which would inherently shift your gears towards better acts of self-preservation. And that in turn, depending on who you are, might make you weaker. Another handicap that Cursed Arm had was the fact that now that Shaitan was trapped inside of his arm, he no longer could use his arm for regular battle. He was forced to do any fight that he had with one arm. So consider how much of a fight that Hassan can put up just using one arm the entire time. It almost reminds me of Amakusa and how hard he was going despite cutting off his own arm. The only time Hassan has access to that arm is when he's using the Phantasm. And even then, Hassan himself isn't safe when he's using it. And we got a way better representation of that when he was fighting against Tristan, when he decided to go all out and release Shaitan. And though it did take down Tristan, overall, Shaitan was also about to devour Hassan himself. The only reason he did survive is because King Hassan intervened to stop it. That is Cursed Arm's bread and butter. The arm itself puts a curse on humans that will bring them death, though it won't work on spirits of its own kind because the concept is then treated as something to be nullified. It's like going against your own ally. We saw this against Kirei. Kirei still had a heart, it's just that the heart was being supplied by Angramanyu, and thus it was negated. And ultimately, despite him being able to shoehorn his way into the group, he does have some resentment for the way that he got there, and this is expressed a lot in the fact where King Hassan was disappointed in him and threatened to chop him down at the beginning of Camelot, Cursed Arm even offering his head in the process. But by the end of the chapter, you see a complete shift where King Hassan makes his resolution known that we all make mistakes, and it's not an uncommon thing for people to fall unto temptation. That's been one of the biggest problems for many people for a long time, and I can relate to this a lot. I told myself I was gonna save the burrito. I ate the burrito, and now I have nothing else. It's tough, man, it really is. You know, looking back, it would have been interesting if they expanded on the concept of delusional heartbeat and Hassan maybe gained some random attribute of the person that he was able to defeat. Maybe he takes some random attribute from Ku. Anything except his luck. Alright, let's make that very clear. Spare me. His battle continuation, for example. And now Cursed Arm has that, on top of everything else that he already has in his kit. Considering the fact that he is part Shaitan, it would be really cool to see this bolstered version of Hassan where we start the chapter and Hassan is on our side, and then we later find out that he's this pretender and Shaitan has somehow hijacked his spirit in the same way that Artemis did to Orion, and he's been bolstered like never before. And then we have to go against him. Something else that I thought about is the foreshadowing that the arm brought for Shiro. Remember, Shiro was under the same circumstance. So when you think about it, Hassan was having this showcase first of a person having this arm that, while it gave them access to powers that were beyond them, it could consume him at any time, just like Shiro had to deal with Archer's arm and the moment that he took his seal off. They practically align with each other. There's just a bunch of dope ideas in that route in general.